The basement door slammed shut behind me, and I heard the deadbolt slide into place with a metallic click that echoed through my bones. My own mother had just locked me in the church basement like a rabid animal, her trembling hands pushing me down those concrete steps, while my sister Vanessa held my arms behind my back. Through the small window near the ceiling, I could see their shadows moving across the parking lot gravel, heading back inside to finalize whatever nightmare they had planned. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I start my story, I would love to know what city you are joining me from. Feel free to share it in the comments. Now, let me immerse you in this story. The fluorescent lights above me flickered and hummed, casting sickly yellow pools across the gray concrete floor. I pressed my palms against the rough wooden door, splinters catching in my skin as I pushed with all my weight. The door didn't budge. My breath came in short gasps, fogging in the cold air that smelled of mildew and old hymnals. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness behind me, each drop marking time like a countdown. I turned and surveyed my prison. Metal folding chairs stood stacked against one wall. A long table held boxes of church bulletins and plastic communion cups. My purse sat on the floor near the stairs where Vanessa had dropped it, contents spilling across the concrete. My phone just inches beyond the reach of my trembling fingers. I lunged forward, my knees hitting the hard floor as I stretched my arm out. My fingertips brushed the phone case. The door at the top of the exterior stairs creaked open. Footsteps descended, multiple pairs, heavy and deliberate. I grabbed my phone and shoved it into my jacket pocket just as the basement door swung inward. Pastor Kenneth entered first, his substantial frame blocking most of the doorway. Behind him came my mother, her face pale and drawn, clutching her worn Bible to her chest. Then Vanessa, her eyes red-rimmed, but her jaw set with determination. And finally, my brother Marcus, his muscular arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. Pastor Kenneth moved toward me with slow, measured steps. His dress shoes clicked against the concrete. He carried a small leather case that he set on the folding table, the clasp making a sharp snap as he opened it. Glass vials clinked together inside, a silver cross, a spray bottle filled with what I assumed was holy water. "Julia, your family loves you very much," he said, his voice echoing off the cinder block walls. I backed away until my shoulders hit the cold concrete wall. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought they might crack. Marcus moved to block the door, his 6'3" frame an impenetrable barrier. My mother's lips moved in silent prayer, her fingers working over invisible rosary beads. Vanessa pulled her cardigan tighter around herself and refused to meet my eyes. "There's nothing wrong with me." My voice came out stronger than I felt, reverberating through the basement. Pastor Kenneth lifted the silver cross from his case. The metal caught the fluorescent light, throwing fractured reflections across the walls. He began to recite Latin phrases I didn't understand, his deep voice taking on a rhythmic quality. My mother joined in, her reedy soprano weaving through his baritone. The words filled the space, pressing against my eardrums until they ached. I slid along the wall toward the small window. If I could reach it, break it, scream loud enough, someone might hear. The church sat on a busy street. Cars passed by every few minutes. My fingers found the window ledge, cold and slightly damp. I pulled myself up on my toes, preparing to shout. Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed my wrist. His grip was iron, his calloused fingers digging into my skin hard enough to leave marks. He pulled me back toward the center of the room where Pastor Kenneth waited with his cross raised high and his eyes closed in fervent prayer. I twisted against Marcus's grip, my sneakers squeaking against the concrete floor as I tried to plant my feet. His fingers only tightened, cutting off circulation until my hand went numb. I brought my free arm up and drove my elbow into his ribs with everything I had. The impact sent a shock through my funny bone, but he barely grunted. Pastor Kenneth's voice rose higher, the Latin syllables tumbling over each other in rapid succession. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the basement's chill. He thrust the cross toward my face, close enough that I could smell the tarnish on the old silver. My mother circled behind me, her footsteps light but deliberate. She'd positioned herself to cut off any retreat toward the stairs. I dropped my weight suddenly, letting my knees buckle. Marcus wasn't expecting it. My wrist slipped through his loosened grip, and I hit the floor hard on my hip. Pain shot up my side, but I rolled away, scrambling on hands and knees toward the far corner, where old filing cabinets created a narrow gap. My palms scraped against grit and dust. Something sharp, a nail or screw, bit into my left palm. Vanessa moved to intercept me, her kitten heels clicking across the floor. She crouched down, arms spread wide like she was herding a frightened animal. Her lipstick was smudged at one corner, her perfectly styled hair coming loose from its pins. Our eyes met for half a second, and I saw something flicker there. Doubt, maybe, or regret. But she didn't move aside. I feinted right, then lunged left. My shoulder caught her in the stomach, not hard enough to hurt, but enough to knock her off balance. She stumbled backward into one of the metal folding chairs. It clattered to the floor with a sound like thunder in the enclosed space. I wedged myself behind the filing cabinets, my back pressed against the cinder blocks, my chest heaving. The gap was barely 18 inches wide. Marcus would never fit. He stood at the opening, breathing hard through his nose, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles jumped. Pastor Kenneth approached from the other side, still chanting, still waving that damned cross. Holy water dripped from a vial in his other hand, leaving dark spots on the concrete. The drops hissed when they hit the floor. Or maybe that was just my imagination, my mind supplying horror movie effects to this nightmare. "Julia, please." My mother's voice cracked on my name. "We're trying to help you." I pressed harder against the wall, feeling the rough texture of the blocks through my thin sweater. My injured palm throbbed, warm blood trickling down to my wrist. The filing cabinet smelled like rust and old paper and mouse droppings. Cobwebs brushed against my hair, making my scalp crawl. Through the narrow gap, I could see all three of them closing in, forming a semicircle that trapped me as effectively as prison bars. The fluorescent light above flickered, casting strobing shadows across their faces. I scanned the confined space around me, my fingers scraping along the cinder block wall, searching for anything I could use. The filing cabinets stood bolted to the floor, no way to topple them. Behind me, nothing but wall. Above, exposed pipes ran along the ceiling about 8 feet up. My mind raced through the geometry of escape. The pipes were old galvanized steel, probably strong enough to hold my weight. I'd done pull-ups in the gym 3 times a week before all this started, back when my family still spoke to me like I was human. My arms burned at the thought, but adrenaline was a hell of a drug. Pastor Kenneth's chanting grew louder, more insistent. The Latin words rolled off his tongue in practiced cadences, his voice echoing off the concrete. He stepped closer, the cross extended like a weapon. Holy water sloshed in the vial, and he flicked more droplets toward me. They landed on my jeans, cold and accusatory. I jumped. My fingers caught the pipe, rust flaking off under my palms, biting into the cut on my hand. Pain screamed up my arm, but I held on, swinging my legs up and hooking my ankles over the metal. Hand over hand, I pulled myself along the pipe, moving toward the far corner of the basement where the ceiling lowered near the furnace room. "She's running again!" Marcus's voice boomed behind me. "Block the furnace door!" Heavy footsteps thundered across the concrete. I didn't look back. The pipe groaned under my weight, decades-old brackets straining. My shoulders shrieked in protest, muscles trembling from the effort. Blood made my grip slippery. Below me, Pastor Kenneth positioned himself directly underneath, arms spread wide as if he could catch me when I fell. And I would fall. My body knew it before my mind accepted it. The pipe jerked. A bracket pulled loose from the ceiling with a grinding screech of metal on concrete. I swung forward, catching myself on another pipe, this one smaller, a water line that shuddered from the impact. My mother cried out, a wordless sound of fear that cut through everything else. I released the pipe and dropped the last 4 feet, landing hard on my feet near the furnace room door. The impact jolted up through my knees and spine. I grabbed the door handle and yanked. Locked. Of course it was locked. My father had probably thought of everything, every possible escape route mapped out and sealed before they'd even brought me here. A hand clamped around my upper arm. Marcus. His fingers dug in hard enough to bruise, spinning me around to face him. Up close, I could see the sweat beading on his forehead, could smell the coffee on his breath. He was my brother, had been my brother, and now his eyes looked at me like I was something contaminated, something dangerous that needed to be contained. I drove my knee up into his stomach. He doubled over, gasping, his grip loosening just enough. I twisted away, but Pastor Kenneth was there, blocking my path, that cross thrust forward like he was warding off a vampire. The absurdity of it would have made me laugh if terror wasn't squeezing my lungs. "The demon gives her unnatural strength," Pastor Kenneth intoned, his voice shifting to address my mother and brother. "You see how it fights against the holy presence." My back hit the furnace. The metal was warm, almost hot, radiating heat that seeped through my clothes. Trapped again. The 3 of them formed a wall of bodies between me and the stairs. My mother's mascara had run, black tracks staining her cheeks. She clutched her purse against her chest like a shield, her knuckles white. I pressed my palms flat against the furnace, feeling the vibration of the pilot light, the mechanical heartbeat of the house above us. My own heart hammered against my ribs. In the corner, a small basement window sat too high to reach, its glass painted black for privacy. Gray daylight leaked around the edges, the outside world, so close and impossibly far. Marcus lunged forward, his shoulder catching me in the chest and driving me sideways along the furnace. My hip slammed into a metal storage shelf, sending paint cans clattering to the concrete floor. One burst open, splashing turpentine across the ground, the chemical smell sharp and overwhelming in the enclosed space. I scrambled over a stack of cardboard boxes, my hands tearing through decades-old Christmas decorations, tinsel catching in my hair. The pastor moved with surprising speed for a man his age, cutting off my angle toward the stairs. His black shoes slipped slightly in the turpentine puddle, but he caught himself against the wall. That cross never wavered, held up like a talisman. I grabbed a paint-crusted putty knife from the shelf and brandished it. Not much of a weapon, but enough to make them reconsider rushing me all at once. "Julia, baby, please." My mother's voice cracked. "Just let us help you." I backed toward the water heater, keeping all 3 of them in my line of sight. My chest heaved, each breath pulling in that toxic turpentine stench mixed with the musty basement air and something else, incense. Pastor Kenneth had lit a stick of it, now wedged in his jacket pocket, sweet smoke curling upward. The combination made my head swim. Marcus wiped blood from his lip where I'd elbowed him during the scuffle. His dress shirt was untucked, stained with paint from the spill. He looked at our mother, then back at me, calculation replacing the initial shock in his eyes. They were planning something, communicating in that silent way families develop over decades of shared meals and arguments and grief. I fainted left. Marcus took the bait, stepping that direction to block me. I spun right instead, vaulting over a bicycle frame and sprinting for the stairs. My foot came down in the turpentine slick. The world tilted. I caught the stair railing just as my legs went out from under me, pulling myself forward on pure adrenaline. 3 steps up. 4. Hands closed around my ankle. Pastor Kenneth had thrown himself forward, sacrificing dignity for grip, his body half sprawled on the concrete. I kicked backward, feeling my heel connect with something soft. His grunt of pain was followed by my mother's scream. But he didn't let go. His fingers were surprisingly strong, roughened by manual labor nobody would expect from a man of the cloth. Marcus grabbed my other leg. They hauled me backward down the stairs, my stomach and ribs scraping over the wooden edges. I twisted, clawing at the railing, at anything. My fingernails bent backward, sending sharp pain through my hands. A handful of splinters embedded in my palm as they wrenched me away and dumped me onto the basement floor. I rolled, came up on hands and knees, gasping. The putty knife lay 3 feet away. Before I could reach it, Marcus kicked it aside, sending it skittering under the furnace. He positioned himself directly in front of the stairs now, arms crossed. Learning, adapting. Pastor Kenneth retrieved his cross from where he'd dropped it. A thin line of blood trickled from his nose, staining his white collar. He dabbed at it with the back of his hand, then resumed his position, blocking the window wall. My mother stayed near the furnace, tears streaming freely now, her whole body trembling. "The binding ritual," Pastor Kenneth said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a coil of white rope, the kind used for flagpoles. "Hold her!" Marcus moved first, his heavy work boots thudding against the concrete. I scrambled backward, but the basement offered nowhere to go. My shoulders hit the washing machine. Cold metal pressed against my spine as Marcus grabbed my wrist, twisting my arm behind my back. Pain shot up to my shoulder socket. I drove my elbow backward, catching him in the ribs. His breath exploded hot against my neck, but his grip only tightened. Pastor Kenneth approached from the other side, rope uncoiling in his hands like a white serpent. I kicked out, my foot connecting with his knee. He stumbled, but didn't fall. Marcus forced my other arm back, both wrists now pinned behind me. The pressure on my shoulders sent white-hot agony through my joints. I thrashed, using my full body weight, but Marcus outweighed me by at least 80 pounds. The rope bit into my left wrist first. Pastor Kenneth worked quickly, looping it around multiple times, pulling each circuit tighter than the last. The coarse fibers dug into my skin, cutting off circulation. I felt my fingers start to tingle, then go numb. I threw my head back hard, trying to strike Marcus's face, but he'd learned from the earlier blow. He shifted, and my skull glanced off his shoulder instead. "Please stop fighting, Julia," my mother sobbed from her corner. "Let them help you." Her words fueled something dark and desperate inside me. I planted my feet and pushed backward with everything I had, driving Marcus into the concrete block wall. His grunt of pain was satisfying. His grip loosened for just a second. I wrenched one arm free, the rope burning across my skin as it slipped partially off. Pastor Kenneth lunged, trying to recapture the loose wrist. I swung at him, my fist glancing off his temple. Not hard enough to stop him, but enough to make him hesitate. Blood still dripped from his nose, darker now, staining the white rope in his hands crimson. Marcus recovered, slamming me face first against the washing machine. The metal edge caught my cheekbone. Stars exploded across my vision. Warm blood trickled down my face. Before I could recover, they had me again. Both of them this time. 4 hands controlling my movement, forcing me down to my knees on the cold concrete. The rope came around again. Pastor Kenneth worked methodically now, binding my wrists together behind my back with practiced efficiency. Loop after loop, knot after knot. When he finished with my wrists, he started on my ankles. I kicked wildly, but Marcus pressed down on my shoulders, holding me in place. The weight was crushing. Each breath came shallow and painful. "Kneel before the Lord," Pastor Kenneth commanded once my ankles were secured. "Show proper respect." They forced me upright into a kneeling position. The rope around my ankles cut deep, preventing any chance of standing. My bound wrists throbbed with each heartbeat. Blood dripped from my cheek onto my collar, spreading in a dark stain across the white fabric. Pastor Kenneth retrieved his cross again, holding it high. He began chanting in Latin, the same phrases repeating over and over. The words echoed off the concrete walls, growing louder, more insistent. My mother joined in, her voice cracking and raw. Marcus stood behind me, one hand on my shoulder like a jailer, ensuring I stayed put. I tested the ropes, twisting my wrists back and forth. They didn't budge. Kenneth had tied them expertly, each knot reinforcing the others. My fingers were completely numb now, useless appendages I could barely feel. Panic clawed up my throat. This was real. They were actually going through with this. Pastor Kenneth set down the cross and pulled out a small vial of oil. He unscrewed the cap, and the scent of frankincense filled the basement. Sweet and cloying, it made my stomach turn. He approached, his shadow falling across my face. "I anoint you in the name of the Father," he said, pressing his oil-slicked thumb against my forehead. I jerked my head away, but Marcus grabbed my hair, forcing me still. The oil felt cold and viscous on my skin, sliding down toward my eyebrow. Pastor Kenneth's thumb moved to my cheeks, leaving greasy trails, then my chin, my throat. Each touch felt like a violation, an invasion of my body that I couldn't prevent. Story block, 6/10. The oil dripped down my neck, soaking into my collar alongside the blood. My skin crawled where Kenneth's fingers had touched. I tried to shake my head to dislodge the substance, but Marcus's grip in my hair tightened until my scalp burned. His fingernails dug into my skull, sending sharp pinpricks of pain radiating outward. Kenneth stepped back, wiping his hands on a cloth. He nodded to Marcus, who finally released my hair. My neck muscles screamed as I tried to straighten, but the rope around my shoulders prevented any real movement. I could only slump forward slightly, gasping for breath. The basement door creaked open. Footsteps descended the stairs, heavy and deliberate. A woman emerged from the shadows, carrying a leather-bound book that looked ancient, its pages yellowed and crumbling at the edges. She wore a long gray dress that brushed the floor. Her silver hair pulled back so tight, it stretched her weathered face into a perpetual grimace. "Sister Delilah has arrived," Kenneth announced, gesturing toward the woman. "She has performed over 60 exorcisms. The demon inside you doesn't stand a chance." Delilah set the book on a folding table someone had set up while I was being anointed. She ran her gnarled fingers across the cover, tracing symbols I couldn't identify. Her lips moved silently, forming words I couldn't hear. The air in the basement seemed to grow colder, though no windows were open. My breath came out in visible puffs. She approached me, her eyes narrowing as she examined my face. Her pupils were milky with cataracts, but her gaze felt sharp, penetrating. She reached out and grabbed my chin roughly, turning my head from side to side. Her fingers smelled like mothballs and decay. "How long has the entity been present?" she asked Kenneth, her voice like gravel scraping concrete. "Her family believes 3 months, perhaps longer." Delilah released my chin and circled around behind me. I couldn't see what she was doing, but I felt her hands pressing against my back, my shoulders, the base of my skull. Each touch sent shivers down my spine. She was feeling for something, searching for signs only she claimed to recognize. My mother remained in the corner, her rosary clicking rhythmically as she worked through the beads. The sound was maddening, a constant reminder that she had orchestrated this nightmare, that she truly believed I needed to be saved from myself. Delilah returned to her book, flipping through pages until she found what she wanted. She began reading aloud in a language I didn't recognize, not Latin this time, something older and harsher. The syllables scraped against my ears like broken glass. Kenneth joined in, their voices rising and falling in an unsettling harmony. The rope around my chest constricted further. Not because anyone had tightened it, but because my lungs were seizing, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The walls seemed to close in. The single bulb overhead swung slightly, casting dancing shadows across the concrete floor. My vision started to tunnel. Marcus appeared at my side with a cup of water. He pressed it to my lips, tilting it. The water was warm and tasted metallic, like it had been sitting in rusty pipes. I turned my head away, but he grabbed my jaw, forcing my mouth open. Water spilled down my chin, mixing with the oil and blood, creating a disgusting cocktail that dripped onto my lap. "Drink," he commanded. "You need your strength for what's coming." I coughed and sputtered as the water went down wrong, filling my throat and making me gag. My body convulsed against the ropes, the chair legs scraping against the floor. For a moment, I thought I might vomit, but I swallowed hard, forcing everything down. Delilah approached again, this time holding a small bundle of dried herbs tied with twine. She struck a match, the sulfur smell sharp and acrid, then lit the bundle. Smoke began to rise, thick and white, filling the basement with a smell like burning sage mixed with something sweeter, almost rotten. She waved the smoking bundle around my head in slow circles, the embers glowing orange in the dim light. The smoke got in my eyes, making them water and sting. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear my vision, but everything remained blurry. My nose started running. I tried to breathe through my mouth, but that only made the smoke coat my throat, making me cough violently. Kenneth produced another vial, this one larger than the first. He uncorked it, and the smell of vinegar filled the air, cutting through the sage smoke. He poured some into his palm, then flicked it at me. The liquid splashed across my face, burning where it hit the cut on my cheek. I gasped, the pain sharp and immediate. "Leave this vessel," Delilah intoned, her voice rising. "You have no dominion here." More vinegar hit my chest, soaking through my shirt. My skin burned where it made contact. Kenneth kept flicking it at me, coating my arms, my legs, my face. Each splash felt like acid eating away at my flesh. I squeezed my eyes shut, but it didn't help. The vinegar found its way into every scrape, every abrasion the ropes had created. I slumped forward against the ropes, my head hanging low. Every muscle in my body screamed. The vinegar had dried in sticky patches across my skin, pulling tight whenever I moved. My wrists had gone from burning to a dull, throbbing ache that pulsed with each heartbeat. Dark bruises ringed both arms where the rope had cut off circulation. Pastor Whitmore descended the stairs, his heavy footsteps deliberate and slow. He wore white robes now, ceremonial and starched, completely different from his usual Sunday suit. The fabric whispered as he moved, a sound that made my stomach clench. In his hands, he carried a leather-bound book, pages yellowed with age, the spine cracked from years of use. Behind him came my sister Valencia. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her fingers twisted together, knuckles white with pressure. She'd been the one to call the pastor. She'd been the one to tell him I'd been speaking in tongues, attacking family members, destroying church property. All lies. All fabrications born from her jealousy over the promotion I'd received at work, the promotion she'd wanted. "Julia," Pastor Whitmore's voice filled the basement. "Your family loves you. They want to save you from this darkness." I lifted my head, every vertebra in my neck protesting the movement. My lips were cracked, split in 2 places from dehydration. When I tried to speak, my voice came out as a rasp. "There's nothing wrong with me." Kenneth slapped me across the face. The impact snapped my head to the side, and I tasted blood immediately. Fresh warmth trickled from my nose, running over my lips and dripping onto my lap. My vision swam, black spots dancing at the edges. I blinked hard, trying to focus, but everything remained blurry. Delilah grabbed my hair, yanking my head back so hard I felt strands tear from my scalp. She forced my mouth open, her fingers digging into my jaw joints until pain exploded through my face. Pastor Whitmore stepped forward with a small bottle, something dark and oily inside. "Blessed oil," he announced, "consecrated for spiritual warfare." He tipped the bottle against my lips. The oil hit my tongue, thick and rancid, coating the inside of my mouth with a taste like motor grease mixed with decay. I gagged, my throat convulsing, trying to reject it. But Delilah kept my head tilted back, kept her hand clamped over my mouth and nose. I couldn't breathe, couldn't spit it out. My lungs burned, screaming for air. I had to swallow. The oil slid down my throat in a viscous glob, leaving a trail of nausea in its wake. The moment Delilah released me, I bent forward and retched. Nothing came up except bile and traces of the oil, burning acid that scorched my esophagus on the way back up. Pastor Whitmore opened his book. The pages crackled as he turned them, finding his place. He began reading in Latin, words I didn't understand, but that sounded ancient and heavy. His voice rose and fell in a rhythmic chant, filling every corner of the basement. Valencia finally looked at me. Tears streaked her face, carving clean lines through her makeup, but she didn't move, didn't speak up. She just stood there, hands still twisted together, watching them torture me. Kenneth and Delilah moved in perfect synchronization, circling me like predators. Kenneth produced a small knife, the blade catching the light. My entire body went rigid. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to fight, but the ropes held firm. I could only watch as he approached. He grabbed my left arm, stretching it as far as the rope would allow. The blade touched my forearm, cold steel against fevered skin. Then he pressed down, drawing the knife across my flesh. The cut wasn't deep, but it was long, running from my wrist almost to my elbow. Blood welled up immediately, bright red and shocking against my dark skin. The pain came a second later, sharp and clean and absolute. I screamed, the sound ripping from my throat raw and primal. Kenneth moved to my other arm, repeating the process. Another cut, another line of fire across my skin. Blood dripped onto the concrete floor, forming small pools that reflected the dim light. "Mark the flesh," Pastor Whitmore intoned, never stopping his Latin chant. "Seal the body against corruption." Delilah dipped her fingers in my blood, then drew symbols on my forehead. The wet warmth slid down my face, mixing with the dried vinegar and sweat. I could smell the copper tang of it, could feel my heart pounding as it pumped more blood through the cuts. My vision darkened at the edges. The basement tilted, walls seeming to lean inward. I was losing too much blood. My head felt light, disconnected from my body. My fingers and toes had gone numb. Cold crept through my limbs despite the basement's stifling heat. Valencia turned away, one hand over her mouth, but she didn't leave, didn't call for help. "Right block 8 here." The basement door exploded inward with a splintering crack. Wood fragments scattered across the concrete as two figures barreled down the stairs. My vision swam, but I recognized the crimson jacket, my neighbor Marcus, the one who always walked his terrier past my house every morning. Behind him came a woman in a postal uniform, still clutching her delivery scanner. Marcus lunged at Kenneth, driving his shoulder into the younger man's ribs. They crashed into the metal shelving unit, sending paint cans and tools clattering across the floor. The knife skittered from Kenneth's grip, spinning across the concrete until it disappeared under the water heater. Pastor Whitmore stumbled backward, his Bible dropping from his hands. The postal worker, her name tag read Simone, grabbed Delilah by the shoulders, yanking her away from me. My sister-in-law twisted, clawing at Simone's face, her fingernails leaving red streaks across the woman's cheek. "Get off me!" Delilah shrieked, her voice shrill and panicked. My mother stood frozen against the far wall, her face drained of color. Valencia had dropped to her knees, sobbing into her hands. The air reeked of blood and vinegar and fear sweat, thick enough to choke on. Marcus had Kenneth pinned against the shelving, one forearm pressed across his throat. Kenneth's face purpled, his hands scrabbling uselessly at Marcus's arm. The older man's jaw was set, eyes blazing with fury I'd never seen in him before during our polite morning greetings over hedgerows. Simone pulled Delilah into a headlock despite being 6 inches shorter. My sister-in-law bucked and thrashed, her designer heels scraping against the concrete. Blood from my forehead symbols smeared across Simone's uniform sleeve as they struggled. "Someone call 911!" Marcus barked over his shoulder. Pastor Whitmore edged toward the stairs, his expensive loafers crunching on broken wood. His face had gone pale beneath his practiced television smile, sweat cutting through his foundation makeup in visible streams. He moved with careful steps, trying to slip past the chaos unnoticed. My vision blurred again. The basement ceiling seemed to pulse and ripple like water. Blood continued to drip from my arms, the cuts Kenneth had made still seeping despite the slowing of my heart rate. Each drop that hit the floor sounded impossibly loud in my ears, like stones falling into a deep well. Simone wrestled Delilah toward the staircase, grunting with effort. Delilah's perfectly styled hair had come loose, hanging in wild tangles around her face. Her silk blouse was torn at the shoulder, revealing the lace of her bra beneath. Kenneth managed to get one hand free and drove his fist into Marcus's side. The older man grunted, but didn't release his grip. Instead, he shifted his weight and drove Kenneth down to the concrete floor. Kenneth's head bounced off the ground with a sickening thud, and his body went slack. Pastor Whitmore reached the stairs. His foot hit the first step. "Don't you dare!" Marcus growled without looking away from Kenneth's prone form. The pastor froze. His hand gripped the wooden railing, knuckles white. His chest heaved beneath his three-piece suit, the gold crosspin on his lapel catching the light with each ragged breath. My mother finally moved. She crossed the basement toward me, her orthopedic shoes shuffling across the blood-slicked concrete. Her face was unreadable. Not the fury from before, not the conviction that had driven her to arrange this nightmare. Something else. Something I couldn't identify through the fog in my brain. She reached for the ropes binding my right wrist. Her fingers trembled as she worked at the knots, the same fingers that had helped tie them hours earlier. The rope burned as it loosened, cutting deeper into my raw skin. I whimpered, unable to form words. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Valencia remained on her knees, still sobbing. The sound echoed off the concrete walls, mixing with Kenneth's labored breathing and Delilah's continued struggles against Simone's grip. My daughter's hands were pressed so hard against her face that her fingers had gone white. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Multiple vehicles from the sound of it. Police, ambulance, maybe more. The cavalry arriving too late to prevent the damage, but just in time to witness the aftermath. My mother freed my right hand, then moved to my left. The blood made everything slippery, harder to grip. She had to use her teeth at one point, worrying the knot with her dentures until it gave way. When both hands were free, I collapsed forward, no strength left to hold myself upright. She caught me, her arms surprisingly strong for a woman of 72. She lowered me to the floor, her own knees cracking as she knelt beside me. Blood soaked into her church dress, the one she'd worn specially for my exorcism, dark red spreading across pale yellow fabric. The sirens stopped outside. Car doors slammed. Heavy footsteps pounded above our heads, shaking dust from the ceiling joists. Someone shouted something incomprehensible. Then the thunder of boots on stairs filled the basement. Police officers poured through the broken doorway, weapons drawn. They took in the scene with practiced efficiency. Marcus still holding Kenneth down, Simone restraining Delilah, Pastor Whitmore frozen on the stairs, Valencia crumpled against the wall, my mother cradling my bleeding body on the concrete floor. "Paramedics!" one officer shouted up the stairs. My vision tunneled to a pinpoint, then expanded again. Faces swam in and out of focus. Someone pressed something soft against my forearms, trying to staunch the bleeding. The pressure sent fresh waves of pain through my nervous system, and I heard myself screaming again from very far away. More footsteps. A gurney clattered down the stairs. Hands lifted me, professional and efficient. The ceiling scrolled past above me, water-stained tiles giving way to wooden stairs, giving way to the afternoon sky, impossibly blue and clear and beautiful. When had the sun become so bright? Right exactly block 910. Below. The hospital's ceiling tiles clicked past overhead as the gurney rushed through fluorescent corridors. Each bump sent electricity through my torn forearms. The paramedic squeezed a bag connected to the IV in my hand, her lips moving in counts I couldn't hear over the ringing in my ears. Emergency room doors slammed open. Chrome lights blazed down, turning everything white and sterile. Nurses descended like efficient birds, cutting away my blood-soaked clothing with practiced scissors. Cold gel spread across my chest as they attached monitor leads. The machine behind me began its rhythmic beeping, too fast. A hummingbird heart announcing my terror to the room. A doctor appeared above me, his dark eyes scanning the monitors before dropping to examine my arms. Deep lacerations, both forearms, significant blood loss. His voice carried no emotion, just clinical assessment. Get me suture kits, antibiotics, and type her blood for transfusion. His fingers probed the wounds, and I bit down on nothing, my jaw clenching so hard my teeth creaked. The cuts ran parallel down each forearm, precise and deliberate. Kenneth's hunting knife had been sharp. The doctor's face remained impassive as he began cleaning the wounds, irrigating them with solution that felt like liquid fire. 2 nurses held my arms steady while he worked. I watched him thread the curved needle, watched it pierce my skin again and again, pulling flesh together in neat rows. The local anesthetic they'd injected dulled the pain to a distant throb. But I felt every tug, every pull of the thread. 23 stitches in my right arm, 27 in my left. I counted each one, focusing on numbers instead of the memory of Kenneth's hands forcing mine against that concrete pillar. Through the doorway, I could see the waiting room. My mother sat rigid in a plastic chair, still wearing her blood-stained yellow dress. She hadn't changed, hadn't gone home. Her hands twisted in her lap, working invisible rosary beads. An officer stood nearby, notebook open, asking questions she answered without looking up. The doctor finished the last stitch and wrapped both my arms in white gauze. The bandages felt heavy, restrictive, like wearing Kenneth's grip even now. A nurse adjusted my IV, hanging a new bag of clear fluid that dripped steadily into my vein. Antibiotics, she explained, though her voice seemed to come from underwater. Then something for the pain. Warmth spread through my chest, down my limbs, and the sharp edges of everything softened. They wheeled me to a room on the 3rd floor. Evening light slanted through the window, painting everything gold and orange. Had hours passed? Days? Time had become elastic, stretching and contracting without pattern. The nurses transferred me to the bed, adjusting pillows behind my back, raising the head of the mattress so I could sit partially upright. The IV pole stood sentinel beside me, its steady drip marking seconds. My mother appeared in the doorway. She'd washed her hands, but blood still darkened her fingernails, caught in the crescents where nail met skin. She moved slowly into the room, each step deliberate, as if testing whether the floor would hold her weight. The chair beside my bed received her with a wheeze of compressed air. For long minutes, neither of us spoke. She stared at my bandaged arms, at the monitor wires disappearing beneath my hospital gown, at the oxygen sensor clipped to my finger. Her face had aged a decade in a single day. New lines carved channels from nose to mouth. Her eyes sat in hollowed sockets, dark circles beneath them like bruises. "Delilah and Kenneth are in custody?" Her voice emerged rough, scraped raw. "Pastor Whitmore, too. The police say there will be charges: assault, false imprisonment, attempted—" She couldn't finish the word. I watched her hands twist in her lap, saw the tremor that ran through her fingers. 72 years old, and her whole world had fractured. The church that had anchored her faith for decades had tried to kill her daughter in its basement. The pastor she'd trusted had orchestrated it. Her own husband had held me down while her sister carved into my flesh. "Your father is being questioned." She continued staring at her hands. "He kept saying you were possessed, that we had to save your soul. Even when the police handcuffed him, he was quoting scripture." Through the window, the sun dropped toward the horizon. Orange became red, became purple. Shadows lengthened across the hospital grounds, swallowing the parking lot one row at a time. Somewhere down the hall, a patient called out, their voice muffled by distance and closed doors. A cart rattled past, pushed by invisible hands. I should have stopped it sooner. My mother's words fell like stones. When they first suggested the exorcism, I should have said no. Should have protected you. Her hand reached toward mine, then paused, hovering in the space between us. She studied the bandages, the IV line, all the evidence of her family's violence made visible. Finally, her fingers settled on the bed rail instead, gripping the metal until her knuckles paled. But I was scared. The confession emerged barely above a whisper. Scared that you really were possessed. That loving you meant condemning your soul. That the church knew better than I did what you needed. She lifted her eyes to meet mine for the first time since entering the room. Tears tracked down her weathered cheeks, following the new lines grief had carved. I chose fear over love, chose their certainty over your truth. The heart monitor beside me beeped its steady rhythm. The IV dripped. Outside the window, streetlights flickered on one by one, pushing back against the gathering darkness. Story block 1010. 6 months stretched behind me like a bridge I'd crossed in darkness, emerging finally into morning light. The apartment I'd rented sat 3 states away from everything that had tried to destroy me. A small 2-bedroom with hardwood floors that creaked under my footsteps and windows that faced east, flooding the living room with sunrise each day. I stood at those windows now, coffee mug warming my palms, watching joggers navigate the park across the street. Steam rose from the ceramic surface, curling into nothing. My reflection stared back from the glass, thinner than before, hair grown longer, eyes that no longer flinched at sudden movements. The therapy office I visited twice weekly occupied the ground floor of a converted Victorian house downtown. Dr. Chen had specialized in religious trauma for 15 years, her walls covered with certificates and degrees that legitimized what my family had called demonic. During yesterday's session, I'd described a full week without nightmares. She'd smiled, making notes on her tablet, and the simple validation had brought tears I no longer tried to hide. My phone buzzed against the kitchen counter. I crossed the room, bare feet silent on wood, and lifted the device. A text from Diane, a woman I'd met at the trauma support group, asking if I wanted to grab lunch. 3 other messages waited above it. A neighbor inviting me to a block party, a notification about my online college courses, a reminder about tomorrow's shift at the bookstore where I'd found part-time work. I typed a response to Diane, confirming noon at the cafe we both liked. Set the phone down, returned to the window. The restraining order had been approved within 2 weeks of the hospital discharge. My father, my uncle, the pastor, none of them could contact me legally. My mother's letters arrived monthly, forwarded through my attorney's office. I'd opened the first 3, read her apologies and explanations, her promises that she'd left the church, that she wanted to rebuild what they'd broken. The 4th letter sat unopened on my bookshelf, spine up beside novels I'd been too afraid to read before. Books about women who survived, who rebuilt, who learned to trust again. Maybe I'd open it tomorrow. Maybe next month. Maybe never. The choice belonged entirely to me now. I dressed for my morning run, pulling on leggings and a moisture-wicking shirt, lacing sneakers I'd purchased at a store where the clerk had called me ma'am without judgment, without scripture, without anything but ordinary human courtesy. The building's main entrance opened onto the sidewalk where autumn leaves collected against the foundation. I stretched against a lamppost, feeling muscles lengthen, preparing for movement. The park trail wound through trees losing their summer green. Other runners passed, some nodding greeting, others lost in their own rhythms. A woman throwing tennis balls for her retriever waved as I jogged by. The dog bounded after its toy. pure joy and motion, and something in my chest loosened watching that uncomplicated happiness. 3 miles dissolved under my feet. My breathing found its pattern, steady and strong. Sweat dampened my hairline despite the morning chill. At the trail's halfway point, I paused at the fountain, drinking from cupped palms, watching water cascade over stone. A year ago, I'd been trapped in a basement, held down by people who called it love. Now I stood under open sky, lungs full of clean air, body my own again. The return route took me past the bookstore where I worked. Through the window, I could see my manager arranging the display table, probably preparing for the author event scheduled next week. She'd asked if I wanted extra hours. I'd said yes without the panic that would have choked me months ago. Back at the apartment, I showered, dressed, made breakfast. Scrambled eggs and toast, orange juice in a glass I'd chosen myself from a thrift store downtown. The normalcy of it felt revolutionary. Eating food I wanted, wearing clothes I selected, inhabiting space no one could violate. My laptop waited on the kitchen table. I opened it, navigating to the essay I'd been drafting for my Introduction to Psychology course. The assignment asked us to discuss nature versus nurture, and I'd chosen to examine how environment shaped belief, how fear masquerading as faith could poison entire families. The professor had left encouraging comments on my last paper, suggested I consider majoring in counseling. The idea had taken root. Maybe someday I could sit across from someone the way Dr. Chen sat across from me, offering validation, safety, the revolutionary notion that surviving didn't make you possessed, it made you strong. Hours passed in focused work. Lunchtime arrived, and I walked to the cafe where Diane waited at our usual corner table. She'd escaped a different kind of religious abuse, discovered herself at 53, rebuilt from ruins similar to mine. We shared quinoa bowls and stories that required no explanation, no defense, just truth between two people who understood. "You look good," Diane said, studying my face across the table. "Lighter somehow." I nodded, swallowing food, considering the observation. She was right. The weight I'd carried, invisible but crushing, had begun lifting. Not gone entirely. Maybe never completely gone, but manageable now. Survivable. Evening found me at the support group that met in the community center basement. 12 folding chairs arranged in a circle, coffee brewing in the corner, boxes of tissues strategically placed. New faces appeared each week, people freshly escaped, eyes still haunted, hands still shaking. I remembered being them, remembered thinking the damage was permanent, the fear eternal. Now I offered what others had offered me those first terrifying weeks. Witness, validation, proof that time and safety and stubborn persistence could rebuild what violence destroyed. Walking home after the meeting, I passed shop windows glowing against darkness. A bookstore, a coffee shop, a boutique selling handmade jewelry. Ordinary storefronts in an ordinary neighborhood, but they represented something extraordinary. A life I'd chosen, a future I was creating, a self I was learning to trust. The apartment welcomed me with warmth and silence. I made tea, settled on the couch with the novel I'd been reading, let fiction carry me into someone else's story. When exhaustion finally arrived, I moved to the bedroom, sliding under covers that smelled like the lavender detergent I preferred. Sleep came without terror, without visions of basements or grasping hands or voices shouting scripture. Just darkness and rest and the knowledge that tomorrow I'd wake here, safe, free, mine. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.